In today's video, I want to discuss the possibility of a blockbuster trade between the Penguins and the Canucks. Plus, we have some trade rumor updates on the Winnipeg Jets, and we have news that Sean Burke is leaving the Montreal Canadiens. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have some trade rumors I want to take a look at here today and some news as well. First up, we're going to talk about the news of Sean Burke. Apparently, he's not going to be renewing his contract with the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, he's been there leading their goalie department for the last little while. Apparently, his contract is expiring. Of course, he was hired under the old regime there in Montreal under Marc Bergevin. So it makes sense that he probably would rather go work under another team. And of course, the team that's there with Gorton and Hughes would probably prefer to have their own people that they hire in those roles. So it makes sense that it's an amicable departure in that sense. So Sean Burke is going to be joining the Vegas Golden Knights to head up their goaltending department in their organization here instead. So obviously the same kind of role essentially. So he'll work with the goalie coach, he'll work with the goalies. It seems to be a trend now that teams are doing, not just having a goaltender coach, but having like a whole department to kind of oversee not just the NHL goalies, but oversee the goaltending department at the NHL level, the prospects, and just the whole organization. So Sean Burke's got a pretty good record for what he's done in that regard, so it should be a good move there from the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, I want to talk about some trade talk around Winnipeg. We've talked lately about Pierre-Luc Dubois and the news that he won't sign long-term and wants to be a free agent as soon as possible, which in his case is 2 years' time. So we've heard about that recently. We've heard about the fact that Blake Wheeler and the Jets apparently kind of agree that it's probably time for a change and that maybe he should be moved. And they're working together to possibly facilitate a trade. Don't think it has to happen, but they both feel like it's time, I guess, is what's been said by NHL reporters like Elliotte Friedman. And, of course, there's some about Mark Scheifele that, you know, even though he didn't request a trade at the end of the season like some thought he might, but there's still a possibility based on the relationship or the direction of the team that a lot of people thought it could still possibly happen. Even though he didn't explicitly ask for it, it was reported back a number of months ago that he basically didn't demand it, but would be okay and would welcome it if it did indeed happen. So essentially what Friedman's saying now is that he's believed for some time that it is pretty much a given that between Wheeler, Scheifele, and Dubois, that all three of these players would not be returning next season. We know the Winnipeg Jets are also going to have a new head coach. Jeff Merrick asked Friedman on the latest 32 Thoughts podcast that came out today if that new head coach that they're going to hire would kind of give us a little bit more of a hint on which players will go, which ones will stay, and then more of an insight on the direction of the team and the franchise. But he said not necessarily. He suspects they're going to hire a coach that's obviously, fits different categories and things they're looking for, but somebody who's really good with young players. It seems like they need to make sure they incorporate more and more youth, and it does seem like Kevin Cheveldayoff is really focused on the prospects in the future of the club. I think they're still going to try their best here to contend and be a playoff contender for the next few years because they're going to have some tough decisions to make on the players we're talking about here. But at the same time, they don't want to absolutely go through a rebuild. It doesn't sound like that's really on their agenda. But if you can kind of start to slowly move out some vets and move in some more youth at the same time, you can kind of avoid going the teardown route in the you're kind of rebuilding, but in a different fashion where you're doing it at a slower pace. And incrementally kind of turning things over to a younger group of players. They certainly have some interesting young players there that we know of, like Cole Perfetti, Chaz Lucius. There's some players that very well could jump into the lineup this coming year, get more of an opportunity to see where their development stands at the NHL level as well. So with the Dubois and Scheifele both being centers, Friedman mentions that it's very unlikely that they both get traded, where he felt between the three players that they wouldn't all be back, at least one would go. It kind of sounds like it might be more likely that Wheeler is the first one to go, at least now, whereas Dubois, I would suspect, will likely get traded, but it may not happen this year. That's something like when we talked about Dubois wanting to go to Montreal in a video in the last day or two here. That's something, like I said in that video, not something that will necessarily happen right away. And of course, there's no guarantees that he goes to Montreal. That's a two-way street. Just because something he wants doesn't mean they want it. Doesn't mean it's going to work out. whatever. It just means he wants to be a free agent in 2024, right? So they could put that off a year, sign him to a 1-year deal, and deal with this next offseason. That's a real possibility that they might do. We've seen Cheveldayoff be patient in other scenarios before, like with Andrew Kopp. They were aware they were probably going to lose him. They signed him to a 1-year deal last year, traded him at the deadline, got a good return, and moved on. And, of course, with Jacob Trouba before that, same scenario. So he's shown how he normally handles these things. So I do think a Dubois trade is possible this offseason. I just think that it's going to have to be somebody come to them and just make him an offer. He says, yeah, okay, this is too good to pass up. I got to do this for the franchise. Otherwise, it's going to more likely happen next year. And I would think that Wheeler is probably the most likely Jet player right now to get moved. And of course, Scheifele sounds like he could be staying as well. But again, it just kind of depends on what happens. I mean, Scheifele and Dubois basically essentially could be both on 2-year contracts, or within 2 years, both of them may or may not be Jets. It just kind of depends, right? So we'll see what happens, but there's certainly going to be a very interesting team to watch. Definitely going to incorporate more youth. And as it stands today, I think Scheifele, which is something I wouldn't have said a few months ago, is probably the most likely out of the three to stay, at least for this year, with Wheeler being the most likely and Dubois probably being in the middle with a more likely trade next offseason. At least that's kind of how it seems like it's most likely going to play out. But of course, like I said, GMs talk and trades happen. Sometimes things come together at different time frames than you kind of anticipate. So we'll have to wait and see where that goes. Now, as I mentioned on the title here of the video, could we see a blockbuster deal between the Penguins and the Vancouver Canucks? We know that JT Miller is no doubt being moved. It sounds like it's pretty much like a done deal to me based on all the reports that we're hearing. Friedman said on the 32 Thoughts podcast that essentially, unless there's a major change of philosophy, either in the Canucks side or on the Miller side, that essentially he's done and he's going to get traded. It sounds like Rutherford and Alvin and the Canucks do not want to give Miller a long-term deal at the kind of money he's looking for because of his age, the direction of the team, the need cap flexibility, and they know they can cash in on a really good trade return right now given the season he just had. So it's almost like you have this asset that had a phenomenal year, the value is at an all-time high, and at the same time, that signing him to that long-term deal, the kind of money he's looking for, is very risky. So even though the deal could be good in the beginning, it would probably be problematic in the second half, or at least, there's a good chance. You can't predict the future, right? You just can't predict the rate at which players slow down and regress in their play. But statistics will tell us that there's a good chance in that. So it's pretty much a given that unless Miller decides that he'll take a fair bit of a haircut here to stay in Vancouver, which I just don't see happening based on what he can get on the open market on an extension, and with the Canucks deciding that they want to have an 8-year deal for a player entering their 30s at $9 million, which I just don't see either. That it's almost a done deal that he's going to get moved. Just a matter of where and what the return's going to be. Now, according to the latest intel on the rumors here from Friedman, it sounds like the teams that are most interested that we could see would be Washington, Pittsburgh, New Jersey. So good chance he ends up in the Metro, but of course there could be other teams swoop in here as well. No, not a given that these are the teams that it takes place with, but with Pittsburgh having a lot of flexibility right now because they don't have deals for Letang, Malkin, etc. Like right now things are trending in the direction, and this is only as of today. Things can change in a heartbeat here, but as of right now, I think it's trending towards the possibility that Malkin may not be back. At least that's what the latest intel says, that they're too far apart. Now, the money that he wants is going to be too much for Pittsburgh to keep him, and if they let him go, then they could bring in a guy like Miller essentially to play the number 2 center role for a cheaper price tag. He's also a little bit younger and could be there a longer stretch and help the team remain competitive for a longer time. We know that Jim Rutherford knows that Penguin team very well because he would work there for a long time as the GM. So certainly we know he's also been very interested in getting John Marino to Vancouver. That seems apparent as well. A player like Kasperi Kapanen has been mentioned in reports that likely won't be in Pittsburgh next year as a pending RFA, and somebody who really hasn't fit the way they'd hoped there. But again, Rutherford is the one that acquired him, paid a pretty good price tag to get him out of Toronto, to get him back to the Penguins organization. Seems to be a fan of his play, and I think he obviously has a different vision on how he could fit. So not a given that these are the exact parts here that could be involved, but we know two things that we can say are for sure. One is that Miller's 99% getting traded, in my opinion, and we know that Rutherford's a big fan of Marino. So it makes sense that might be what he targets here. Now, there's also some young pieces in the Penguins organization that could be a part of this as well. We could have some a first-round pick in 2022. They're picking at number 22, I believe it is. That could be something that's included. They could ask for the 2023 first-round pick. That could be something that they look at. So one of those two picks likely would have to go in. They get some interesting prospects. Maybe their former first-rounder, Samuel Poulin. That's a possibility. 2019 first-rounder, played last year in the AHL, had a good first pro season, put up 37 points in the AHL. Lucas Svechkovsky, I mean, to me, he's a good-looking prospect, but he could be a bit of a late bloomer. At the same time where he played his last year, junior this year, had a more dominant season. Sometimes you see that at that age, and it may not be an indication of how things will translate because they are older, stronger, get more experience. They're playing against a lot of younger players, and sometimes that's why the results tend to get skewed a little bit. But he did have a real phenomenal year. He does have connections to Vancouver. He did play for the Vancouver Giants early in his junior career. Finished up with the Seattle Thunderbirds and had a real good run where he get to play with stronger teammates and stronger team. His numbers really flourished. Had an awesome playoff. I think he wasn't quite a point-per-game player in their playoff run. They just missed winning the WHL championship and going to the Memorial Cup. They lost out to the Edmonton Oil Kings. But he had a real solid run and played a big role in that team. So there's a couple of young players that I think that could be of interest. You got Pierre-Olivier Joseph on the back end as well. I think Pittsburgh might be more inclined to keep Joseph. Because if they trade Marino and if they do keep Letang, then they're going to need some youth to mix in there as well, and he could be a part of that. I can see Rutherford asking about him as well. I don't see a scenario where they trade Marino and Joseph, though, in the same deal especially, because that would really take away a lot of their youth on that blue line. And, the rest of it is not as young. So I don't see that scenario. I mean, not that all their D are old or anything like that, but outside of Letang, they're not super old. But, that's two of their younger D that are, potential parts of the future. I can't see them moving both. But if they sign Letang to a 4 or 5 year extension, then I think Marino becomes expendable. And he's signed for could be a fair contract of just over $4 million based on what he's capable of. He can get a bigger role, playing that right side, maybe get a little bit more of a power play 2 time in Vancouver, perhaps. We know Vancouver are looking for cap flexibility. We know they're probably going to try to do some other things in that blue line to shake things up a little bit. Wouldn't be shocked if they try to move Tyler Myers. So if they can get out of that Myers contract and slide Marino in, that would be good as well. And I wouldn't be even shocked either as that Connor Garland could be included. I know the Penguins, amongst other teams, have shown interest in this player, even back to the time he was in Arizona. And a lot of teams seem to like what he brings. He obviously plays with sandpaper, plays with grit, plays with pace, and is fairly productive. And a good contract, really, I think, for what you get out of him most nights. Good motor on him. So to me, you could even see a scenario where Miller and Garland are maybe even packaged together to the Penguins. The only concern here is if they're getting that much out of Vancouver, some money has to go back to the Canucks, so they may not get as much cap flexibility as they might want. So there's that. In that scenario, do they take Kapanen and Marino both? I don't know, because you get Miller and Garland would be making just a little over $10 million a piece. You get Marino at 4.4. Kapanen, I don't think, can really bargain for too much. So depending on what you can get him signed for, maybe you get them both for around 6 and change. You end up saving maybe close to $4 million in cap. But of course, you are in a different spot here. Your team's going to look different. You're going to have to mix in some young players and some other guys, obviously, like the prospect that did sign out of Russia and things like that, right? Kuzmenko will get a top 6 role. So we'll see where this goes. It's no guarantee that this trade goes down the way it is, but based on current reports between what Elliot Friedman's saying on 32 Thoughts, what we heard Rick Dollywall say in his show and on Twitter here recently, it pretty much sounds like it's a 99% sure thing that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin are going to trade Miller. Just a matter of where he goes. I don't see New Jersey giving up their number 2 overall pick for Miller. Maybe they do. I mean, if they offer it up, I think that's probably the deal we see happen. And this Pittsburgh deal probably doesn't come to fruition. But I'm not sure that the Devils are going to do that. I think they'd want a younger player to offer up the number 2 pick. So to me, they'd go after more like a guy like a Fiala or something of that nature, like a younger player who's going to be equally or close to being as equally as productive as a Miller. So I don't know if that's happening in the Capitals. Yes, the Capitals certainly need a player like Miller, especially with Backstrom going down with the hip surgery. But I just don't know that they have the assets that would really intrigue Rutherford and Alvin to make the deal there. I mean, I know there's Connor Sheary, that there's a player there that they're familiar with, but that's definitely not enough, nowhere near enough. And they just don't have a lot of high-end picks. They've been picking lower in the draft and stuff like that. They don't have a deep prospect pool. I mean, I think the Canucks would like Connor McMichael, but are Washington going to want to give him up? I wouldn't think so, but I just don't know that they have the pieces. I don't know if New Jersey really wants to move that number 2 pick for Miller. So that's why I think of all the teams mentioned that maybe Pittsburgh might be more likely. But again, that really largely boils down to Evgeny Malkin not returning. If they come to terms with Malkin, then this deal really can't happen. There just wouldn't be cap space available. And they're not going to have Crosby, Malkin, Miller. I just don't see that being a scenario. They already have Gensel and Zucker and other guys signed up here. They just signed Brian Rust. Like, there's just that's not going to happen. They get Jeff Carter too. Like, if Malkin's returning, then this deal definitely doesn't go down this way. But to me, I think things are trending towards him not returning. And if that happens, then I can see this being a fallback option. But Pittsburgh would probably have to have a decision made by the draft if Malkin's coming back or not, because this is likely the time that we'd see this kind of deal go down. So let me know your thoughts on the possibilities. Give me your mock trades. Again, the rumors are surrounding all of these different players and pieces. This is me kind of piecing it together to think of what I think we might see. Let me know what you think, and we'll discuss in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.